Hey, my name is Dr. Hannah Hamlin, and I'm going to talk about insulin resistance in people with type 1 diabetes. And I think that this is such a complicated topic, honestly. A lot of the friends that I have that work in medicine get confused about this because it's very, very nuanced. And so often we are taught that people with type 1 diabetes have an insulin deficiency. We don't make insulin anymore, and so we need to replace the insulin. And then people with type 2 diabetes have what's called insulin resistance, which means their body makes enough insulin, sometimes a lot of insulin, but the cells don't know how to use the insulin, and so it doesn't work, and so their blood sugar gets higher. So we kind of have it in two categories: insulin deficiency for type 1 diabetes, insulin resistance for type 2 diabetes. And that is 100% true and very simplified. But just like people with type 1 diabetes can get high cholesterol or high blood pressure like everybody else, people with type 1 diabetes can get insulin resistance. And that's where it gets confusing. And so I want to talk about exactly what insulin resistance is, and I want to frame it on a scale. And so what we think about insulin resistance is just how well is your body using insulin? And there's kind of on each end of this gradient scale, there's insulin resistance, which means we need a lot more insulin to get movement in our blood sugar to come down, versus insulin sensitivity. If we're very insulin sensitive, this might be you after a workout, for example. You don't need as much insulin to bring down a high blood sugar. You're more insulin sensitive. So it's kind of how is your body changing? Now, I know that after living with type 1 diabetes for, I can't remember, 18 plus years now, I can tell when my body is in a state of more insulin resistance or more insulin sensitivity. And it changes based on my lifestyle factors. It changes sometimes day to day, certainly week to week, definitely throughout the month with my female hormones. My insulin sensitivity changes. You may know this if I'm with your body. If I'm sleep deprived and I haven't gotten enough sleep, I need a lot more insulin the next day. If I am super stressed out because I've got a big test coming up, I need more insulin. I'm more insulin resistant. If I'm eating like just tons of processed junk food, I'm typically more insulin resistant. When our blood sugars get really high, it takes a lot more insulin for them to come down. It might take more insulin to come down for 50 points than it would if you were 150 versus 350. So we create insulin resistance in this state of our body needing more insulin to see that movement. And it can happen with little normal natural things. Another thing is when my hormones change, we have a surge in our female hormones the week before we start menstruating. And I definitely have insulin resistance every month that week and need a lot more basal rate. That's normal, happy, kind of healthy hormonal picture. There's nothing wrong with that. So insulin resistance is not bad. It's something that happens as a result of our body's metabolism changing. Insulin sensitivity, for example, if I've gone on a long walk with my dogs and I come back and I'm going to bolus for a snack, I may know that I'm going to be a little bit more insulin sensitive and not need as much insulin. Insulin sensitivity can also come from things like being really relaxed. Like if I remember some beach vacations I've gone on where we don't have a lot planned other than just hanging out at the beach. Of course, I'm maybe moving more, I'm in the sun. There's a lot of variables that change, but I'm also not checking my work email. I feel a lot more insulin sensitive then and notice that I don't need as much insulin. Other things that can cause insulin sensitivity are really just kind of being in a place where you're healthy and more balanced. For example, if we have an illness, a lot of people when they're fighting off a cold are going to have more insulin resistance. And so when I don't have that, when I'm feeling healthy and I'm not, fighting an infection, I have more insulin sensitivity. These are really kind of very rudimentary examples you may have figured out for yourself, and they're not the same for everybody. So my patterns might not look like yours, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Our bodies respond differently. But what's important to understand is there's a whole scale of insulin sensitivity that can kind of swing into increased sensitivity and decreased sensitivity, which would be insulin resistance. Now, when we think of the insulin resistance that constructs someone who has type 2 diabetes, what we're really talking about is being in an insulin resistant state a lot of the time, where their body's pancreas has to create more and more insulin. And actually, if we test their insulin levels, they're on the high end. And that's a sign that their body's not using their insulin as effectively. And this can happen. Now, if you are someone with type 1 diabetes and maybe in your adult life over the last 2 years, you've gained 30, 40, 50 pounds, you may notice that you have a lot higher insulin need than you did before you gained that weight. It's okay that that happens, but it's our body's response. You may be creating some insulin resistance. It doesn't always have to come with weight. Like I said, before exams, I have more insulin resistance because I'm stressed out. So maybe you take a new job that's really stressful, or you've got crazy hours where you're not sleeping as well. Those things can cause insulin resistance. I remember when I was on night shifts in residency, I needed a lot more insulin to cover the almost exact same meals because my day-night sleep cycle had adjusted. And so my cortisol hormone, which is a kind of a hormone that helps us regulate our circadian rhythm or our day-night sleep cycle, had changed during that time. And so it changed the way I needed to show up with my insulin use. And so it's okay to have insulin resistance. It's not inherently bad. But if we're seeing that our body needs a lot of insulin over a long period of time, and we're not able to get adjustments from our blood sugar, as we would like, it might mean that there's something going on with you metabolically that's more than type 1 diabetes. That's not something to be scared of. It's just data and knowledge that we can have to say, what are things I can do to move myself back to a more insulin sensitive state? And for people who are overweight, that often looks like losing weight. But again, that's not everybody. People can be insulin resistant and have a very normal, healthy BMI, but be incredibly stressed out, or be fighting a chronic infection, or maybe they have a lot of inflammation because they have Crohn's disease and they don't know it yet, or there's something else going on. They don't feel safe at home, or they're in a job that really doesn't work for them, or there are all these things. They're not moving. Maybe we just move to a more sedentary lifestyle. That can create a sense of insulin resistance for a lot of people. Maybe we're choosing foods that are really inflammatory and highly processed, and so we're creating a state of insulin resistance by eating foods that aren't really working for our body. There are a lot of things that can happen there, but can people with type 1 diabetes have insulin resistance? Yes, absolutely. I do all the time, but it's temporary. And I'm able to get myself back into an insulin sensitive state, often. It's not a bad thing, but it's helpful to understand. If you find that you are struggling with insulin resistance, it's becoming harder and harder, you're needing more and more insulin to do the same things, might be a helpful tool to stand back, look at your life, talk to your doctor at your next appointment, and really say, what are the things that I could do to shift my insulin needs, because I know that's representative of the state that my body is in, less inflamed, more balanced. My metabolism is working better. We often feel better, when we're not hugely insulin resistant, if it's long lasting. So I hope this was helpful. I'm trying to take a very complex medical topic and turn it into examples that make sense, that are more tangible for someone who doesn't have medical training to understand. If this created more confusion, please let me know, because that is not my intent, and I would love to answer any questions that come off of this discussion. I hope that it did clear up some of this for you, and I hope that you've at least now understood the difference in our body's response to insulin, looking at insulin sensitivity, insulin resistance, and how that's a gradient and it's normal to shift back and forth from that. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, again, please leave them below. If you haven't already liked and subscribed, that would make a big difference to me as I create more videos, and thanks for sticking to the end.